Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So I think it was just over a year ago I did a video on Australian journalist Cheryl Moody as well as Australian politician Pauline Hanson. Now if you watched that video you would know that I have been very critical of Pauline Hanson in the past. But I do have to give credit where credit is due, and Pauline Hanson at the moment seems to be the only Australian politician who gives a shit about fathers' rights, or in a more broad sense, men's rights. And she has recently launched an inquiry into the family court system.
Well, there's been a mixed response to the federal government's surprise decision yesterday to hold an inquiry into the family court system. The review comes after years of lobbying from One Nation leader Pauline Hanson, who joins us now from Canberra. Pauline, good morning to you.
Good morning, Georgie.
You have been pushing for a shake-up of the family court for years. What do you want to see come out of this inquiry?
I want the people of Australia to have a say. I have that many come to my office, pull me up in the streets. They're devastated, destroyed by the whole system, the family law system that they say is unfair, unworkable. It covers many areas about the cost of it, about child protection, child support, payments that they're making or not getting. The workings of the court, Georgie, it is so far and so extensive.
And of those issues, what do you believe are most urgent? What need to be addressed urgently?
What I'm hearing is parents that are not having the opportunity to actually see their children. The court system is dragged out. It takes months to get into it. Then the cost involved with it, whereas a lot of parents can't afford to even go through the court system. They're not getting to see the children, and then they're paying exorbitant amounts in child support. What I like to see is right from day one, 50-50 custody. And you sit down, you mediate about the time. Unless the person has a criminal offence, they're on drugs or alcohol abuse, or they've actually have committed domestic violence prior to separation. Let's make that a starting point. In legislation there is 50-50 custody, but it's at the discretion of the judges. And I don't think that's good enough. Look, it's about what the people want. I want to hear from the people and these organisations themselves. The system is not working, it's broken down, so people are not getting the answers that they need to. You know, in some cases it'll take even up to 6 years for a decision to be made. The judges are overworked, and some judges are not competent enough to actually handle family law. They're tied up in other issues in the courts, especially the Federal Circuit Court. So, and the allegations that are put before the courts of false domestic violence allegations. This is impacting on the cases, and it's so wrong.
With quivering voice,
I beg you, please give me a chance to try and make change.
Pauline Hanson's claiming a mission accomplished moment.
It's not the Pauline Hanson inquiry. This is the Australian People's Inquiry.
And it's not her first. Back in 2016 and now 2 years later, she's twice got a government to look into whatever's wrong with the family court system.
I'll tell you who loses when this system doesn't work. Mums, dads, kids.
Domestic violence covers that many areas, and a lot of people, especially women, will use domestic violence, and the one they're using of late is sexual molestation by the father of the child. And this is what they're using to bolster their case and stop the ex-partner or the father from seeing their children. I don't think that's right. If you really believe in equality and you feel that what is just and lawful in this country, you should be supporting this inquiry. Why use these false allegations to bolster your case, or lawyers that drag out cases or encourage their clients to use these allegations? I think that's disgusting, and I think it's wrong. So anyone who says that this is going to create more deaths in this country, well, shame on you. Let's have the inquiry, let people have their say, let the truth be heard, and let's work together to find the answers to stop it. Because of the family law court, the laws surrounding it, no one can actually speak of their case publicly for fear of actually repercussions and charges to be laid against them. So they can't speak about their cases. Whereas in the inquiry, they can actually express what's happened to them under the protection of, like parliamentarians are protected. So this is very important that we do get the truth, because not only can people talk about their cases, journalists can't report it. So we're not getting a fair and balanced view of what is happening in our society. So that's why it's very important to give the people of Australia a voice.
You in fact believe the family court system is unfair to many men. Just elaborate on how men are being let down particularly.
Well, they are. There's organisations out there that are purely set up, to try and help men. We don't fund them, we don't give them assistance, and I think that is wrong. We call for equality. I always have called for equality for everyone. I think that a lot of the women out there abuse the system by instigating false DVOs against their former partners or their husbands who use that to further their needs. I think there are some lawyers out there that also push that point of view. I think that's unfair to these fathers, and I know that the court system doesn't have the ability to prove whether it's false claims. There is perjury there, but no one's charged with perjury. The whole thing needs to be, people must be responsible for their actions. I am totally against domestic violence, don't get me wrong. But when someone wants to text and say, I want to see my child, or asking about the child, and that's a domestic violence order, I don't think that's good enough, and it's not right. This is why the inquiry, that's why we need to hear these cases. Every state is different with their domestic violence orders. It needs to be unified in this. We need to actually expose the whole court system for what it is, whether it's the lawyers, whether it's the judges, whether it's, look at child protection. Let's look at the best interests of the child. Let's look at why parents aren't getting to see their children for years and years. Let's look at the child support. They're paying enormous amounts of money in child support, don't even get to see their children. Let's make that a fairer system for people. So it really covers a wide range of issues that I believe the people of Australia have been calling out for this. What about the grandparents that don't even get to see their grandchildren? Let's put the hate behind us. You've had a breakup, get on with your life, as the Prime Minister said. That's what we need to do, and that's what this inquiry is about. It's not about self-interest groups, it's all about them. But I'm looking at right across the board to help those mums, those dads, those grandparents, extended families, and most of all the children out there, because they're denied the right to see either their mum or dad, and I think that's so wrong.
Of course, though, is that campaigners against family violence are outraged by this decision for an inquiry. They say we don't need another inquiry. The Australian Law Reform Commission handed down 60 recommendations just 6 months ago, and the government is yet to respond to those recommendations. Isn't that where you should be applying the pressure?
Georgie, we've had these inquiries, yes, we have had the ALRC, the sample review, and we've had the KPMG.
So why another one?
KPMG, because they only tackled certain areas. ALRC was only about the court law, about the law itself, the family law itself. KPMG was about costing, and the sample report was about the court structure. This is holistic, where we go into it a lot further with family law. Grandparents that don't get to see their children as well, they have a right to see their parents. Child protection, so it goes beyond this. This is a holistic view about it. Now, this is why I don't want it to run for a short period of time. It's not just about me. It's about sitting down with my colleagues, the other parliamentarians, and coming up and speaking to the chair, Kevin Andrews, about how we want to deal with this and take it forward.
And just on that, you, as I understand it, want to co-chair this inquiry. How do you respond to critics who say you're not an expert in domestic violence and therefore not suited for that role?
No one knows of my role and what I've actually experienced in my life.
Are you suited to it?
Sorry?
Are you suited to be co-chair?
I most definitely am suited to it. And people, my experiences in life is going to be very beneficial in this inquiry. I've been through this as a mother, as a wife, and as a grandmother. I've experienced it for years, and listening to the people of Australia what needs to be done. But this is about listening to the evidence that's put before us to make a well-informed decision. It's not just about my views. It's about what the whole panel, all the committee members, will come to their final decision. That's why I don't want it rushed. I don't want it. I want to take it to every state and territory in this country. I want to see it in rural and regional areas. Let the people speak. Let them have their voice. And these people want to shut it down. That's disgusting. It really is. This is about the people who are crying. This is about deaths that are happening, suicides, even women getting murdered. So what's your answer to it? I say to those people, what's your answer?
So for the most part, I think that is all really, really positive. Although I do have one criticism of Pauline, and that is She has said repeatedly this.
But what do you see as the key problems here? Who's losing out most and in what way?
Chris, it's been brought to my attention that fathers feel they're not being heard, they're not being given a fair go. It concerns me greatly when it's been brought to my attention that 3 fathers a day are suiciding over this, and not to forget that 1 woman is being murdered a week on average. That is not good enough in our society. When we see the road carnage on our roads, we actually move to do things about it. We impose fines or more policing, yet we have not done enough to stop this carnage that is happening through our family law court system, because it doesn't work.
So let me correct that, okay? It is true that 3 men do commit suicide in Australia each day, and it's also true that the family court, or to be more specific, family breakdown or family breakups and divorce, are responsible for some of those suicides. The key word here is some. 3 men are committing suicide a day, but 3 men are not committing suicide a day just because of the family court system. There are many, many factors as to why men are committing suicide at such high numbers. Now, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be talking about suicide and the family court. Of course we should. Suicide peaks after a divorce, but it is not the only cause. It is not the only reason, and we need to be discussing all those reasons. Saying that 3 men are committing suicide a day because of family court is kind of like saying that the entirety of the road toll is due to people being on their mobile phones, as opposed to, people speeding or drink driving or whatever. We need to be very accurate about these things. And that also goes for the fact that she said 1 woman a week is dying or being murdered, to be more accurate, due to the family court. Once again, this is simply not true. Now, it is true that 1 woman every 6 days dies in Australia due to family violence, and 1 man dies every 10 days in Australia due to family violence. That is all true. And it's also true that part of that number is due to family breakdowns and the family court, no doubt. But we can't attribute all of it to the family court. I guarantee you many of those women and men who were killed by their partners were still in relationships with those partners. But that criticism aside, I think what she's doing is good and positive, and hopefully it will have some good results. Of course, it is a very, very complex topic, which unfortunately is filled with more emotion than it is with logic a lot of the time. And it's all too easy for people to want revenge on their ex after a nasty breakup, and one way of doing that is using the kids. This makes the whole situation extremely messy, and unfortunately I don't think there are any easy solutions. But talking about it and doing an inquiry is a good start. Now, as you may have expected, not everyone is happy about this.
Fresh after announcing plans to deputy chair an inquiry into family law, Queensland Senator Pauline Hanson says too many women are lying about domestic violence in order to get full custody of their children. The comments have infuriated domestic violence campaigners.
Pauline Hanson has wanted to reform the family court for decades. Now she has her chance. But minutes after saying she'll be deputy chair of a government inquiry, she accused women of lying about domestic violence to get custody.
Well, as you may have guessed, that's not exactly true. So let's have a look at exactly what Pauline said minutes after she was appointed to that position.
This is happening all the time, and clients are using it, or those people are using these threats or these domestic violence orders to support their case why that parent shouldn't see the children. I think this is so wrong.
Now, if you thought I had to hunt down that clip and then edit that in, you'd be wrong. That clip followed immediately after the clip I just showed you where they said Pauline Hanson was accusing women of lying. And then they show a clip where she doesn't actually mention women lying, which is pretty astounding. Although I shouldn't be surprised, should I? So let's have a look at exactly what Pauline Hanson said. She said, there are people out there who are nothing but liars and will use that in the court system. You'll note that she said people. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I'm pretty sure people covers both mothers and fathers. She then said, I am hearing too many cases where parents are using domestic violence to stop the other parent from seeing their children. Perjury is in our system, but they are not charged with perjury. Now, last time I checked, parent and parents are terms for both mothers and fathers. So strange that a quote saying parents would be turned into women. But anyway, there's one more quote. She also said that some women are making up domestic violence claims in custody cases. Okay, you'll note the word some. So let's have a look at the definition of some, because a lot of journalists don't seem to understand what the word some means. The word some means an unspecified amount or number of. So some could be 2%, it could be 5%, it could be 10%, it could be 50%, it could be 99%, right? Some covers all of that. So if you have a problem with Pauline Hanson saying that some women lie in family court to get custody, then you must assume that there are no women anywhere who are lying in family court, who have never lied in family court and never will lie in family court. You must be of the opinion that women are incapable of lying, which is strange because these same people have no problem accepting that men are violent and abuse their partners and kill their partners and rape women and lie in family court to get revenge on their partners. But apparently women are incapable of doing this. They can't even accept that there are some women who are capable of doing this. Apparently it is just an impossibility for women to do. How strange. It's almost like it's female supremacy. What other explanation could there be, right? If you believe that men are capable of all those things I mentioned, but women aren't even capable of lying to get their kids in a custody dispute, well, women just must be innately more superior, more morally pure. What other explanation could there be? And of course, the word some was turned into these types of headlines. Pauline Hanson claims victims of domestic violence are lying to game family court. Well, no, if they're actual victims of domestic violence and they claim that they're a victim of domestic violence, they're not lying, are they? It says here, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson has claimed that women were lying about domestic violence to get more access to their children after separation. Not some women, but apparently just women in general. And of course this one, Pauline Hanson lashes women lying about domestic violence in family courts. Not some women lying, not parents, not people, but just women in general. Apparently it's all women and only women who lie in family court. And of course in this article, Pauline Hanson has launched an extraordinary attack against women who she claims are lying about domestic violence in family court. Yes, apparently the word some means all women or every woman, because apparently women don't lie, ever, under any circumstance, not even to get custody of their kids. Now, to be fair, as you saw earlier in this video, Pauline Hanson also said this.
And a lot of people, especially women, will use domestic violence, and the one they're using of late is sexual molestation by the father of the child. I think that a lot of the women out there abuse the system by instigating false DVOs against their former partners or their husbands who use that to further their needs. I think there are some lawyers out there that also push that point of view.
So she did also say a lot of people, especially women, and in a separate interview, a lot of women. Now, just let me point out that if a feminist came out and said a lot of men lie in family court to get custody of their kids or to get revenge on their ex, no one would batter an eyelid, let alone write hundreds of articles about it. If a feminist came out and said a lot of men are rapists or domestic abusers or whatever, no one would batter an eyelid about it, let alone write hundreds of articles about it. So it is an incredible double standard we have here. And in case you're wondering what the actual statistics are for women lying in the family court, I'll get back to them a little bit later. Because yeah, I do actually have some stats. And surprisingly, I got these stats from the actual feminists who were trying to debunk Pauline Hanson. They actually prove her case. But anyway, this is a fairly common thing we see here. It seems that we aren't allowed to criticise women in any way. Not a particular woman, not a percentage of women, or not even women in general. Yet, feminists can generalise about men constantly. But of course, there are exceptions to this rule. It's perfectly okay for Pauline's detractors to attack her, despite the fact that she's a woman, because she's the wrong type of woman. She belongs to the wrong political party. If people came out and said similar things about a left-leaning female politician, there would be hell to pay. It would be written off as anti-woman hate. But I guess misogyny really does depend on the political leanings of the person in question, right? Anyway, let's go back to that clip criticising Pauline Hanson, because they have some other criticisms that I want to look at.
Ms. Hanson says her son and his children are victims of the system.
You cannot have anybody overseeing or involved with an inquiry that already has an agenda. It is unacceptable.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is we shouldn't have feminists involved in an inquiry into the family court. Well, that's an interesting point of view. One which I happen to agree with, by the way.
Anti-domestic violence campaigner Rosie Batty, whose son was killed by her ex-partner, says there's no need for the inquiry in the first place.
Now, I've covered who Rosie Batty is in past videos, so I'm not going to go into her past story in any great detail here, but I do think I need to touch on it briefly. Back in 2014, Rosie Batty's son was killed by his father, who was then shot and killed by police. It was basically suicide by cop. This is what Rosie Batty had to say afterwards. She said, "No one loved Luke more than his father. What triggered this was a case of his dad having mental health issues. He was in a homeless situation for many years. His life was failing. Everything was becoming worse in his life, and Luke was the only bright light in his life." Those are direct quotes from Rosie Batty, who then, years later, became a crusader for battered women. Which is strange, because her situation would suggest that this is more of a men's rights issue. The victim was a boy, a male, so there are no battered women in this particular case. And the reason why the perpetrator did it wasn't anything you'll find on the wheel of oppression from the Duluth model. It wasn't male privilege or the patriarchy or toxic masculinity or anything like that. It was a mentally ill man who was homeless, who was failed by the fucking system, who should have got help. That's a men's rights issue. But somehow, strangely, this has been twisted into male perpetrator, women victims narrative. And Rosie Batty does everything she can to erase male victims and preach the female victim only narrative. It's fucking disgusting.
Because the government hasn't implemented any recommendations from a report it commissioned in 2016. That report was published in March this year. It made 60 recommendations for changes to the family court, including a requirement that the court consider the possibility of a child spending equal, substantial or significant time with each parent be repealed.
Oh, really? Is that what the report recommended? Well, I'm sure they consulted many fathers groups on that one, right? It definitely sounds like it. In fact, why don't we have a look and see who they consulted concerning that particular part of the report. Now, it says here, the requirement to consider 50-50 shared time was criticised in many submissions as introducing an unnecessary additional step in the process of determining care time arrangements. It was also alleged to detract from a focus on what is actually in the child's best interest. Now, whenever you hear a report like this say what is actually in the child's best interest, what they actually mean is what's in the mother's best interest. But we do have a citation here. We see a little number 155, so let's look that up. Merrickville Legal Centre, Catholic Care Victoria, Women's Legal Centre of WA. That's a surprise. It goes on to say, including diverting the court's attention away from a focus on the child's safety needs. Citation 156. And it's Women's Legal Services Australia. What a shock. The report goes on to say, other submissions suggested that it provides scope for exasperating conflict. Citation 157. Women's Legal Centre of WA. I'm shocked. I am shocked that we would be getting that from women's legal services across Australia, who constantly promote the feminist narrative. What was that Rosie Batty just said minutes ago?
You cannot have anybody overseeing or involved with an inquiry that already has an agenda.
Oh, that's right. I guess that only applies to fathers groups though, right?
I think that's unfair and unjust to those parents out there. Let's listen to what the parents have to say.
Ms Batty called on Labor and the Greens to block the inquiry.
But I say to the Prime Minister, we can't support an inquiry in which he has unilaterally, along with Pauline Hanson, done a deal.
Okay, let's have a look at another news report, totally unbiased, criticising Pauline Hanson and the inquiry into the family court.
With me now is Angela Lynch, the CEO of the Women's Legal Service in Queensland. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, David.
Is Pauline Hanson right in saying some women make up complaints of domestic violence?
Well, our experience is actually they pretty much underplay the issues of domestic violence. So when women come to us as victims, it often takes a number of interviews with them before they actually develop the trust relationship to actually detail the levels of violence and risk that they suffer.
So most women won't knock on the door, come in and say, I've just had this happen. No. It takes a while to get that out of them.
Absolutely, yeah, they're ashamed. They're frightened of telling people, and they have trust issues themselves in relation to the professionals that they engage with. So it's not something that they walk in and say easily.
Now, you'll notice that she avoided answering the question. The question was, do some women lie in family court? She didn't say yes, some women do, or no, there are absolutely no women who lie whatsoever. Instead, she said that the number of women reporting domestic violence is understated. Now, I'm not surprised she would come to this conclusion because she runs a women's legal service, which not only see women, but I would imagine only see a certain type of woman, probably in a certain economic bracket, who are in desperate need of help of a legal service like this. And I don't know if they would reflect women in general, right? Because obviously not every woman going through the family court is going to go to a legal service like this. And possibly some women who don't go to legal services like this, but go to, your average lawyer, might get certain advice from those lawyers, which might not be exactly honest. And some of those women might take that advice. But I think it's also important that she's not dealing with men who have dealt with being lied about in family court. She hasn't seen the other side.
She says that she's getting cases across her desk every other week of women who have made up complaints. Does that make any sense to you?
No, and I suppose I would be saying where are these issues coming from? What's the source of the information that she's seeking this information from?
Oh, I see. Anecdotal evidence from Pauline Hanson is not acceptable. We can't accept the fact that she said she's hearing from lots of men who are saying that they've been fucked over and lied about in family court. That's not acceptable. We can't accept anecdotal evidence, even though she just gave us anecdotal evidence to support her case. But that's perfectly fine. Not a problem with that. Just the anecdotal evidence that doesn't support her claims. That's the problem evidence, apparently.
Well, now there is going to be a parliamentary inquiry. She will be the deputy chair of it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you worried about that? Do you think women have anything to fear about this?
Well, I mean, my main concern, we're big enough and able enough ourselves as the Women's Legal Service to go before that inquiry and give our views in relation to a victim's perspective. But I'm actually concerned about victims themselves being concerned about going into an inquiry where they may well feel unsafe, that their integrity is under scrutiny and that they could be cross-examined in a kind of very forthright way about their own stories. I think
Is that what this inquiry is going to be? Is this parliamentary inquiry going to ask for victims to come forward and give evidence, or more like groups like your own?
All inquiries allow the opportunity for individual stories to come forward.
But no one has to come forward.
No one has to come forward. But the reality is we know in relation to these inquiries, the most persuasive testimony and evidence can often be from victims themselves and from people themselves, and we know that.
Okay, so she's afraid that female victims are going to come forward and be brave enough to tell their story, and they're going to be asked questions. Some people may doubt that their stories are true, and they're going to ask questions to see if their stories hold water. Fair enough. Does she expect male victims to be cross-examined? If men come forward and tell their stories about being lied about by their ex in family court and losing custody of their kids because of false allegations, does she expect them to be cross-examined, or should the court just believe what they say? Now, I would suspect that she expects them to be cross-examined, right? Which is fair enough. But if she does, then she has a double standard concerning evidence. Now, if she doesn't have a double standard and gives these men exactly the same right that she's expecting female victims to get, and that is not to be cross-examined but just believed, then these men are going to have evidence which directly contradicts her point of view, her worldview, her stance. And I can't imagine that would go well in her favour, would it? So I guess she's behind a rock and a hard place here. Although it's pretty clear her philosophy is only female victims count, or quite possibly only female victims exist. I mean, you know, fuck those male victims, right? Who cares about them?
Do you expect there will be men giving evidence who reckon they've had a raw deal in the family court system, and we'll hear plenty of them, but you're just not sure?
Absolutely. I think that they this inquiry has spoken to them. They have come out in strong support in relation to it, so they definitely will be there. And the concern is that the appropriate level of evidence and testimony from the other side of women in the family law court who have experienced domestic violence isn't going to be there.
Okay, 2 points. First of all, no one is stopping female victims or female advocates from coming forward and speaking, although this woman is doing an amazing job of trying to scare them away, trying to convince them that they're going to be somehow traumatised. It's not the committee trying to silence these women, it's feminists like this one. But the other point I want to make is, I wonder if she is also so concerned about inquiries that don't listen to fathers' points of view. I wonder if she's ever raised a concern that, you know, we're really covered the female perspective here, the female victim perspective, but maybe we should get some dads in here to listen to them and see what they've got to say. I wonder if she's ever said that in her life. I wonder if that's even ever crossed her mind a single time. Probably not.
Nonetheless, are there problems in the family court system that need to be addressed, need to be looked at least by an inquiry like this?
Well, we've just had the Australian Law Reform Commission that has undertaken an 18-month review. It was said and heralded as the most extensive review of the family law system since the establishment of the court in 1975. We engaged in that in good faith, as did victims of violence. There are 60 recommendations there that haven't been answered. We understand that they may be, we don't really know.
Yeah, including recommendation 8, which recommends that the court's considering for child spending equal or substantial and significant time with each parent should be repealed. I'm sure they got a lot of input from fathers groups on that one. I'm sure they had the fathers groups lining up so they could listen to their point of view, because it would have been totally unbiased, right? Sure.
And we just sort of, and that was on top of the Henderson review in the last Parliament, and also another Senate inquiry, as well as other inquiries by the Family Law Council.
Do you see any need for this inquiry?
I see no need for this inquiry. This inquiry, there's no need for this inquiry. We need to make decisions now. There are really enormous issues in relation to the family law system and how it responds to domestic violence. Domestic violence is a background issue in 50 to 85% of matters in the family law courts.
A background issue in 50 to 85%. Wow, it's a pretty wide spectrum there. It doesn't really sound like a very precise number. I also have to wonder, are these 50 to 85% proven cases? Or are we talking about allegations? Because if we're just talking about allegations, you've just proven why this inquiry is needed.
We need big change, a systems overhaul in many ways, and we have the evidence.
You don't think this inquiry will help with that system overhaul in terms of the legitimate complaints about speeding up the system, about the costs involved and so on? You don't think this inquiry will help?
Well, I just don't understand why you'd set up this inquiry when we've already just had the Australian Law Reform Commission inquiry, a completely independent body, looking at it and not even set this up before you've even responded to that.
So why do you think the government's done this?
Why do I think? I think that perhaps they were concerns from men's rights and other groups in relation to the recommendation by the Australian Law Reform Commission about the changes in relation to shared parenting. There was a recommendation about that.
You think? Do you think that maybe, just maybe, fathers and MRAs might be concerned about that? Yeah, I wonder. I really wonder.
I think that there's been some fairly strident lobbying that's been going on, and that this inquiry is a result of that.
Angela Lynch from the Women's Legal Service in Queensland, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's be straight here. Her real concern is that she doesn't have control over the outcome of this inquiry. She's not really concerned that victims are going to be abused by the inquiry or any bullshit like that. She's effectively using them as a human shield, right? As an excuse. Her real concern is that she doesn't have control over the narrative and the outcome. There are people in the inquiry who don't follow the feminist narrative and aren't controlled by it. That's the real concern. Now, dear viewer, you've come to the part of the video which is the icing on the cake. This is the part where feminists try to debunk Pauline Hanson using statistics and actually just shoot themselves in the foot. And maybe grab some popcorn, because this is going to be absolutely wonderful. But just before we get into that, let's once again have a look at that definition for sum. Sum, an unspecified amount or number of. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Let's see if the feminists prove that some women lie in family court and that Pauline Hanson is in fact 100% correct.
They have found that allegations that are false are very, very small, so ranging between 4 and 12%. There is absolutely no evidence to support that this is a widespread concern in which we might need to have an inquiry.
The fact is, there is no evidence of this. The studies that we have, they are few and far between, but we do have ones that have come out of Australia and also of Canada that show actually it's not women at all who make up stories. It's men. Sometimes it's neighbours, sometimes it's extended family members, and I think 14% of the time in the Canadian study was women. So that's just outright not true.
Yes. What do you make of Pauline's comments? Are false abuse claims a big problem in our family courts?
No. And we actually have data for a really long time telling us what about the average number of false claims are, or deliberately false allegations. They're at about 10%.
So we have 4 sets of statistics here. The first one being 4%. which works out to be 1 in 25. That would definitely be some, wouldn't it? The next one was 10%, which is 1 in 10. Now, that would definitely be some, wouldn't it? So the next one was 12%, which I believe are from Australia. So that works out about 1 in 9. That definitely would be some, wouldn't it? And then the last one is 14% from Canada, which I would say is most definitely some. In other words, Pauline Hanson was, in fact, 100% correct. Yet the media has just gone nuts, claiming that she doesn't know what she's talking about and she hates women and she's wrong. And then they bring out statistics to actually show that she's actually correct.
Hi there, I'm Coralie Dimitriadis, and I'm going to be starting to perform poetry in my living room every now and then, in between releasing more polished videos. This is my first poem, and it's in response to Pauline Hanson's, the announcement that Pauline Hanson will be chairing a Senate inquiry into the broken family law system. The poem's called Pauline Hanson to chair a Senate inquiry into the broken family law system, a poem. It's not every day you get out of bed and want to vomit. The nausea came the night before on the news. Family law overhaul and Pauline Hanson to manage it all. I've never felt so sick, something like a woman being punched in the gut by her ex-husband, than watching him take away her child for the week. Misogynist Senator Pauline Hanson done her deal with Morrison. Children crying their cribs. They're crying because the system that was built to protect their well-being, the flawed rule introduced of 50-50 shared parenting, that's going to get even further smashed by her. She's going to get her past experience out, her son being accused of domestic violence and not having access to his kids. She's going to break down that glass into shards so they're wedged everywhere in our society. She says the system works against men. But how can that be when they usually have the most money? How are the women supposed to fight for their children when they stopped working to care for them while men continue to climb the ladder off their backs? How are women supposed to fight for their children when legal aid won't even qualify them for help? The family law system in tatters, a system made for the rich. The divorce lawyers come in, promise to provide shelters to vulnerable women seeking help and answers and protection. Shrug their shoulders after all the money's run out, quietly walk away. I ask you, who the hell is going to take care of our children? The ones who see their mums scared, the ones who see their mums bashed, the ones who get bashed by their fathers, the ones that get murdered by them, or see their mothers murdered by them. Who is going to protect the child that goes back and forth between parents, week on, week off, like a ping pong ball, between fighting and arguing? Who is going to protect this child from psychological trauma? Who is going to sacrifice what the parent wants and what the parent needs to give this child stability? And let's not forget the gag order, the one that prevents anyone who enters the family law system from ever going public about what goes on. What goes on behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. What goes on behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. The family law system in tatters. Women dying, children dying. Scott Morrison's got his meal ticket, and I guess that's all that matters.
2 Tage noch Munition, danach dann nur noch unsere Hände. Woher sie kommen, wohin sie gehen, darüber denken wir nicht nach. Ein neuer Anfang, ein altes Problem, wer schickt hier wen ins Grab? Wir bleiben hier, wir haben die Macht, wir geben niemals auf. Schließ dich uns an, sei ein Held, wir halten stand, um jeden Preis. Festung Europa, die letzte Bastion, bewegt sich kein Millimeter. Im Norden Leben, im Süden der Tod. Wie jetzt noch zögert, stirbt was später.